Hey, it's Shane Parrish. Thank you. Welcome to the live coaching call. I'm going to answer the questions that you sent in and offer a few examples of how people are applying the material to their daily lives and realizing significant benefits. What's the difference between someone who is very productive and someone who's only moderately productive? It's not hours in the day. We all have 24. It's not hours in the week. We all have 168. And believe it or not, it's not kids or other lifestyle things. These obviously impact our ability to get things done, but they don't impact things as much as you would think. Often the difference is nothing more than a few simple strategies that people can implement that make a huge difference. Let's briefly recap the adaptable Farnam Street system. There's 6 key principles. So focus on priorities. Identify the 2 or 3 most important things the night before. Book time in chunks. Make sure you schedule blocks of time between 20 and 90 minutes when you're at your best so that you can focus on your priorities. Align your energy and your task. Do your shallow work when you're at your least productive. You want to do email, phone calls, and meetings that don't require decisions in the afternoon. You also want to use routines. This is very underrated. You want to start each day the same way. Especially the first 30 minutes, you always want that to be the same. You want to wind down for bed in the same way. You want to spend the last 30 to 45 minutes of your day doing the exact same thing. You want to use routines in the sense of chunking. So one of the best ways you can use routines is to block off the same time every single day. So every day you have from 9 to 11 blocked off. You know you don't have to think about it. The only thing you're going to be thinking about is not where to find the time. You're just going to be thinking about what is the most important thing that I can do at that time. You also, the 5th thing in the Farnam Street system is you want to focus on sleep, family time, and relaxing, because this is going to give you the energy and renewal, and it's going to improve your relationships. It's going to take you from being negatively coiled spring into a positively coiled spring. It's going to be the source of your energy. And finally, you want to perpetually course correct and adapt, and this is largely accomplished through self-reflection and feedback loops. Now, if you use any of these things, you're going to be more productive, but that's only going to offer marginal improvement. I mean, the real key comes from implementing as many of these things as you can. When you do that, you're going to get a Lollapalooza, where you take otherwise mundane things and combine them and get something you wouldn't expect from the ingredients alone. So when you start adding 1 or 2 of these things together, you're going to get results that are way more than just each of those things individually. And once you have a system that works for you, you just have to tune it. Of course, the world and your job is always changing, so you don't want to just blindly follow what you've always done. It's key that you set aside time just to think about what's happening and how you're adapting. Of course, the point is that you're working on things that matter, but without a system, you're going to go back to where you've been. It's important you make the system your own. And you need a system, because you know the difference between someone with average productivity and someone with exceptional productivity. So let's dive into the questions and struggles that you submitted over email. The first and most common thing that people wrote in about was saying yes to too many things. It's so easy to say yes. And in my experience, this stems from a few things. It stems from our desire to fill our days to the max. You know what this is like. You're trying to cram one more thing into the day. You're trying to be productive from the minute you wake up until the minute you go to sleep. We grasp onto this because we feel like if we just make more room, we'll do more. But that isn't the case. The more we try to do on a continual basis, the less we actually do. So we end up fragmenting our time into smaller and smaller chunks as we grasp onto the illusion that we're making progress. Now, these small time chunks in turn have a high cognitive cost. It's energy intensive to switch tasks frequently. And at the same time, we're spending more mental energy by switching tasks. We're increasing our fatigue, We're also skipping out on rest and recovery because we're pushing every day to the max. The second reason that a lot of people say yes more than they anticipate do is because they use a to-do list and not a schedule. Remember that to-do lists are evil in this sense. We're going to get to a little point later where I want to talk about how I use to-do lists. But I don't use them in the sense of a big list of things to do that are scatterbrained that I have no time allocated for. We want to avoid those. Instead, we want to schedule our time because this forces us to confront the reality that time is finite and we simply can't do everything. It's going to provide a visual feedback loop. So to stop from everything, you can start working backwards from your ideal schedule. Tell yourself that you only have 6 to 10 productive hours each day and fill those with plenty of buffer space. And when they're full, either push something out or drop it. When I was running a conference a few years ago, I ran into the CEO of a large company in the lobby. And to my surprise, he recognized my t-shirt, very similar to the one that I have on today, and asked if I was Shane. So we ended up grabbing a drink and having a pretty wide-ranging conversation, and he offered a piece of advice that stuck with me ever since. If it's not worth fitting into your schedule in the next 30 days, odds are pretty low that it's not worth doing at all. And that's a good filter. I still use that filter. And it's not that it's not valuable after 30 days. We all have long-term goals that take longer than 30 days or things we want to do well beyond 30 days. But the point is, it's a good heuristic. And that allows us to make quick decisions. I'm going to say no to that because it doesn't fit in the next 30 days. I probably am not thinking about how I want to add the time, so I'm not going to add it to my calendar. I might as well just say no now. If you're like me, one of the things that I used to do was I used to always say yes to everything and just schedule it out way in advance. And I try not to do that now because I was finding like my calendar was just perpetually busy. So now with interviews and everything, if I've got too much on the go, I have 1 or 2 slots a month. And then after that, I'm done. I just say no. Circle back next year, circle back in the fall. And most of the time people don't circle back. On to the next question. How do you maintain a list of things you want to do? So this is a great question. I use a whiteboard, which is right here. I have a file folder for each project I'm working on. So while I schedule time for projects, say designing this productivity seminar, and I have a lot of things to do for the project, I'll have the next step outlined in the folder. And I know we're trying to figure out what the most important thing is for me to be working on. So what I'll do is block off time in my calendar for productivity seminars. So I'll take one of those chunks that I already have pre-allocated, and I'll say I'm going to do the productivity seminar for 45 minutes to an hour. And I'll set aside the time, and then I'll pull out the folder and I'll get into it, and I'll spend the time, the cognitive cost to get into it and get to work. And I can hear you already going like, how complicated can that be? You probably work on more complicated projects like designing airplanes, but it's more involved than you probably suspect. So to give you an idea, when I set up to update this from last year's version, I went through all of the feedback we received on the seminar from last year. I reached out to a few people to clarify where they were getting stuck. And I reached out to people I'd done direct one-on-one consulting with and asked them what worked for them and how they've adapted it. I contacted a web design firm and had them update the look at the sales page because we're trying to get better at creating good experiences. I designed a plan with them and worked backwards. I made changes to the presentation and showed it to a few people, updated it, revised it, tested the website, recorded the presentation at least 100 times, once for audio, once for video, but as anybody knows, I'm not adept at video editing, so all of that stuff, I mean, I had to record it multiple times. I sent it out for transcription, posted it on the web, edited it, prettied up the transcript, and I'm skipping a lot of the steps here, but I think you get the point. It's a pretty involved project with a lot of different components. But it was all run on time chunking, and it was all run with a list inside that folder. You can call it a to-do list for that project. And I blocked off the time, and I worked in large chunks of time. And that's probably the single most important thing that you can do. And a lot of you can't do that. We're going to talk a little later about working in the service industry and how you can adapt, and some of the stories that I've heard from you guys writing in. Next question is a little personal, and this is on my bedtime routine. So a few people actually wrote in to ask what I do at night. And generally, I'm not doing live coaching calls like this one at 10 p.m., that's for sure. So recently, I've been experimenting with this a little bit. I'm going to get into my personal feedback loop in a bit about how I come to these decisions, but I'm rarely on the computer past 9 or 10 now. I'm trying to turn it off and do more analog things, more book reading, more catching up on just daily stuff, or just getting more rest. So unless there's something pressing going on because I want to see how it affects the quality of my work and sleep, I'm doing a little bit less at night. And so far, I found it's not a big factor for my sleep. Getting off the screens has not improved the quality of my sleep. But stopping work at 9 or 10 has had a huge impact on the quality of my work. So for every hour that I'm working past 9 or 10, I can usually do the same task in the morning in 15 or 20 minutes with higher quality. So again, this is an example of when we feel like we're being productive versus actually being productive. And I'm in a place where my mornings are basically perpetually blocked off. This is the one time when I work on the most important things, my biggest priorities, the hardest tasks, and I make everything else fit in outside of that. But at night, before bed, I'll go through a mental list and evaluate what I'm planning on doing tomorrow during those 2 hours and make adjustments to it. The key here is that we want to be flexible. Life happens, things come up, your kids are sick, you have to adapt, and your system should be flexible enough to adapt, and the system that we've presented is. The goal here is that you just want focused time every day to work on your most important projects. The next question comes in about how I implement my feedback loops. And I love this question because a lot of people will just implement something and assume that it works. There's no continuous improvement, and it's just a Hail Mary that you've found the optimal path, and you haven't. I can almost guarantee that your solution is not the optimal path. So the point here isn't to be perfect. And while we're striving for optimal, we must also recognize that it's a fleeting state, as things in life are always changing. It's the process that matters, and the process that we want to adapt is one of continuous improvement. Some of the principles are going to work better for you than others, but how are you going to know which ones? Feedback loops. Feedback loops help you know this. They can be as simple as experiments, like I mentioned above with what I'm doing right now with productivity past 10 p.m., or conversations with yourself, which is my preferred usual feedback mechanism. Here's what I do. So I'm a bit embarrassed to say this. I hope it doesn't get out. But I take a day every December and I go to the Nordic Baths here in the snow. Yes, December in Canada, it's freezing, we have snow. And while I'm there, I just think about what's working and what's not. I think about what I'm doing that I really like doing and what I'm doing that I hate. I'm conscious about it. I want to make conscious choices. And I want to do less of what I don't like and more of what I do like. But if I don't think about it, I'm going to be in the same place next year doing the same things. And if I don't think about it the year after, I'm going to wake up one day and just realize that I haven't been conscious about how I'm living my life. And I do some of my best thinking at the spot. There's no phones, there's relative silence. I rarely, if ever, know anybody. Nobody really wants to talk to you. It's a great environment to connect with nature, to connect with yourself, and start exploring who you are. And a lot of people write that off as not very productive, you're not accomplishing anything. I can't think of time that's actually more productive than that. Getting to know yourself is some of the most valuable time that you can spend. And of course, you're thinking, I do this yearly. And one of the key elements to a feedback system is that it's timely. And I know once a year is not very timely, but it's not the only way that I implement them. It's just the most embarrassing way that I do it. And while I advocate that you set aside time weekly, say 30 to 45 minutes, Fridays, or Mondays, to think about what's working for you, I do this monthly. I'll literally go to a wine bar, grab a glass of my favorite wine, bring a notebook, and start thinking about what's working and what's not. And I'll start asking my questions to myself about where things are going and what I can be doing better. I'll also grab my Moleskine and read through it. So I'll read all of the things that I've written. I'll read all of the notes that I've had over the past couple weeks, and I'll kind of use a filtering process where I'll have a notepad beside me, and those are the things I want to follow up on. And if they're project specific, I come back and I put them in the project folder for what they were doing. And if they're just thoughts or ideas that I want to play with, I just pop them in Evernote. I did this a few days ago, and one of my notes surrounded meetings. As I try to be more social and grow Farnham Street, I'm taking a lot of meetings and phone calls, more than I've ever done in my life. And this is very draining for me because I'm an introvert. So I need to find a way to have these calls shorter, have fewer of them, increase the friction, but not reduce the value. So I need to find a way to help me say no. But I'm not sure I want to say no at this point, because these calls are often lead to people attending conferences. They often lead to people bringing me in for teaching private events. They often lead to great ideas for research that we can do or sponsorships. So I thought about how I wanted to experiment with this, and I ended up setting up 2 hours a week, generally Friday afternoon for me, for all new phone calls. And this is where I try to box everything in. So I picked Friday afternoon because a lot of people don't want to be on the phone on Friday. We're tired, it's a long day of work, and it's important that these conversations are not to make decisions. We're not talking strategy, I'm not doing any consulting. They're social. Someone introduced us, they have a question, those type of calls. I have a vague question about Farnham Street, where did you get started? Maybe a pre-interview for something that we're doing, or maybe I'm filtering different companies that I think we want to work with for the web design stuff that we have coming in. And so my hypothesis is this will naturally shorten the calls, and it also time boxes them for me. So if I'm already full this week, I start deferring people to next week, but you can't indefinitely defer people. So what I suspect will happen is that eventually I'll be deferring people 4 weeks, and then I'll have a good visual feedback that I'm just taking too many phone calls. And I'm not sure this is the case, so this is how I've decided to work through it for now. I mean, we'll see. And part of my monthly follow-up at the end of this month, a month from now, 4 weeks, 3 weeks from now, will be to evaluate whether that phone call system is working or not, and be conscious about changing it and making small tweaks, and what I expect to see from those changes. Your next question has to do with time chunking. So what time chunks do I personally use, and what happens if I finish early? Well, there's nothing better than finishing early and having some extra time. So personally, I use 45 to 60 minutes usually, sometimes 90 minutes, depends on what's going on, how involved I am in the project. And I'll go for a walk between chunks to get a coffee and briefly catch up with some friends who work nearby, or just get out of the office to have a conversation with myself, free up my mind, allow myself to switch. The point is that I always have the same 2 to 3 chunks of time in the morning to allocate. And these are not to-do lists in and of themselves. There's a nuance here. These chunks of time I've set aside. I allocate them for projects, and those projects have a to-do list. Of course, you can't have a project really without a to-do list. It's the way that we use to-do lists that is the problem, not the to-do list in itself. When we use it as a vague catch-all, it just becomes a source of anxiety. And these blocks of time are constant. They rarely change. I don't have to think about making time. I have to think about how I want to allocate it. And this is time for big ideas, big projects, cognitively demanding tasks. This is when I make decisions. This is me at my best. This is not the time for social coffee chit-chats or phone calls or groceries. That would be a total waste. And I want to talk about decision making. A lot of people say that they can't spend more time making decisions, and that's bull. You can spend a ton of time making decisions, because the point is to make the best decision possible given the information you have. It's to think about the problem in a 3-dimensional way. What you don't want to do is what I see a lot of executives I work with do, which is you get a 5-minute window where you get a briefing packet, you read the executive summary, you start making decisions on it, and you realize that you spend, fast forward 6 to 8 months, you realize that you're spending 90% of your day cleaning up avoidable problems. A lot of organizations reward these problems. They reward the firefighting for the people who lit the fire. That doesn't make sense to me. I cannot stress enough how much time it consumes when you make poor decisions. If you can spend an extra 10 minutes making a better decision, and you get a 2 or 3 month window where you can do that, you're going to save yourself so much time, it's going to be ridiculous. And not only will you have more time, you're going to be less stressed. People are going to want to work with you because you're not constantly solving problems. You're going to start attracting the best people to work with you. Next up, we have a struggle. So one reader writes in that they're not able to complete work on time. So she mentioned web browsing and specifically Facebook as a procrastination avenue. So this is a common problem. I think at one point in time, we've all suffered from it. When we're working on a computer, we end up doing more than one thing at once. This is time fragmenting. We have 100 browser tabs open, something catches our eye, we switch over. So we fragment our time. It comes with the same switching costs I talked about earlier. So switching between articles and articles and articles or email and what you're reading carries the same implications for your brain and how demanding it is. And so most people think this is a motivation issue, and to some extent it is. It happens a lot more in the afternoon than the morning, right? It's a lot easier to get distracted in the afternoon than it is to get distracted in the morning. It also happens a lot at night, late at night. I find when I have lapses between switching between all of these different things, it's usually late at night when you're trying to focus on something, but the Facebook siren is too strong. So one way to deal with this is to put wax in our ears. So there's software that'll prevent this. If you Google like productivity, Facebook blocking software, it'll block the internet for you for a predetermined period of time, which is in and of itself ridiculous, but if it helps you be more productive, that's great. What I found works best for me personally is to use pen and paper and actually stay away from the computer. So I'll go to a table. I'll go to a coffee shop and not bring my laptop or my phone. And this is where feedback loops help kind of illuminate the problems, right? At the end of the week, when you're thinking about what worked well and what didn't, you can start thinking and asking yourself and having a conversation with yourself about how you multitask. I mean, you can start thinking about how that impacted your productivity. And if you're doing it on a weekly basis, which is what I advocate at the start, you're going to be getting that feedback fairly clear, right? You're going to be able to recall when it derailed you, and you can start thinking about whether you want to address it and how, and what works for you. I mean, my solutions might not work for you. Multitasking, aside from time chunking, is probably the biggest thing that you can get rid of from a productivity point of view that's going to carry the bulk of the weight. Between those two things, you're just going to dramatically increase your productivity if you do nothing else. So there's a great quote by William Dershowitz, and he said, multitasking is not only not thinking, but it impairs your ability to think. And most people don't associate multitasking and productivity. We value it as a culture. We hold it up as a badge of honor. I can do 6 things at once. You can't. You cannot actually do all of those things at once. Your brain is switching. You are a synchronous processor. When you switch out, you're doing something else. But you have the illusion that you're doing these things at once, but you're not. So thinking, Dershowitz said, means concentrating on one thing long enough to develop an idea about it, not learning about other people's ideas or memorizing a body of information, however much those may sometimes be useful. Developing your own ideas, in short, thinking for yourself. He goes on, you simply cannot do that in bursts of 20 seconds at a time, constantly interrupted by Facebook messages or Twitter tweets or fiddling with your iPod or watching someone on YouTube. That's beautiful. I mean, Dershowitz nails it, right? Insights and real learning, which is what we're after, deep fluency come from sticking to the question. And deep fluency is also applied to decision making, right? When you understand something, you know what to do. You want to explore the decision in a three-dimensional way. You want to walk around the problem. You want to remove your blind spots. And you want to give your brain a chance to make associations and connections. You can't do that in 20 or 30 seconds. You look cool, but you make crappy decisions. This is something, just to reiterate, this is something worth spending time on. In your notebook, make a little note saying, revisit this on Friday, when you start thinking about what's working for you and what's not, because this is something important that you really need to think about. The next question is on learning to say no. Specifically, how can I learn to say no? Now, I'd love to give you 8 rules for how to say no. They're helpful for people. They don't always work. I mean, we all want to please other people, so we say yes. We say yes to everything because we think that we can do everything, and we try to please everyone, and we end up pleasing no one, least of all ourselves. Saying yes to everything usually boils down into an unrealistic view of yourself and what you can do, or a fear. The fear that people won't like you, the fear that they won't think you're doing enough work, the fear that you're not adding enough value, or the fear that they won't be happy with you. And the real problem here is often psychological. And I'm not a practicing or clinical psychologist. I can't work through these deep-seated kind of personal things with you, but I will say in my experience, most often it comes from an unrealistic view of what you can actually do, or the desire to please others. And when you begin to understand the root of the problems for yourself, you can begin to take steps that enable you to do it. If you want to attack the branch and not the root, so you want something tactical you can take away and do tomorrow that will change things, is you can start saying yes. You can let your boss, when your boss asks you to do something, you can pull out your schedule and say, yes, I can do that in 2 weeks. And if that's not soon enough, show him or her your calendar and ask what they'd like you to move around. Again, the solution is not working harder. And in this case, you're forcing your boss to confront your hours in a day. I don't always recommend that, and that's subject to your boss and everything going on at work. That's why I don't like these kind of tactical solutions, because sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. They're very circumstantial. Applying that like a hammer and just going everywhere and hitting nails is not going to work. You have the wrong boss, that's going to backfire. If you have the wrong situation at work, it's going to backfire. If you work for a startup, it's going to backfire. If you work for me, it's probably going to backfire. So you need to think about the circumstances under which that's happening. So another effective way to say no is in an organization, and I've seen people use this really effectively. Again, I'll preface this with, it's a tool. Consider your scenario before you decide whether to use it or not. And that's to say yes and not do it. This is called the slow no, I guess. Often, these balls just drop. If they bounce, pick it up and then do it. But you'll avoid a lot of things that people just say do that they don't actually need or want. And of course, you have to realize that there's no medicine that works without side effects. Think through the implications for your environment, your job, and yourself. The next question is on accounting for reactionary work in a service environment. And this was a really tricky one. Some people work in tech support. They have tickets. They have people who interrupt them at all hours and demand urgent support to resolve an issue. And I've yet to meet anyone in this industry who wouldn't see small changes make big results. One team I worked with a few years back, they were a help desk in a large organization, and tickets would come in all hours of the day. And they were so reactionary. When they were falling behind, they reached out to me. We carved out, I guess, a temporary increase in the employees for a period of a year, but we didn't use the new employees to just go through the tickets faster, right? We used them to start doing preventative things. And it took about 8 months, and that was a long time. And they had worked through all the tickets. Response times drops from days or weeks to, basically hours. And the new employees, importantly, they didn't get fired when they had cleaned this up. They switched to making things easier. They made it easier to actually request support, reducing user frustration and friction. And they made the system smarter, so they started being proactive. They didn't allocate those resources to the same thing, because that's not going to get you anywhere. And of course, I mean, I'm oversimplifying the problem and the solution here. There's a bit more to it than this, but these things can be done. I've seen people carve out an hour or two in these industry, even when they don't do tech support. So here's another example. I have a friend who works in IT support. After talking with me at dinner one day a year ago, he convinced his boss to give him an hour a day, just 1 hour. So from 8 to 9 a.m. where he's not opening tickets, and he's trying to think about better ways to do things. And this has worked wonders for him. And this is time chunking, right? Like in a way, this is his version of it adapted to him. And not only has it worked wonders for him, it's worked wonders for his boss and his entire team. So for a lot of us, reactionary work is common and constant. That's how we earn a living. Reactionary work doesn't mean shallow work. But reactionary work can be your job, right? Somebody's asking you to do something, they expect you to do it in a certain period of time. But when it's all we're doing, we really get caught up in the moment. We never have a time to step back and think about the forest. We see the trees, but not the forest. So carving out an hour, and almost everyone has an hour a day to start stepping back, will likely have a lot of results. It'll make the 7 to 8 hours more productive. It will give you perspective, and it will allow you to improve the system. The last point there is key. It will allow you to improve the system. If you're going to start taking time and doing things differently at work, I want to talk a little bit about loss aversion and psychology here for a second. You're going out on a limb. And if you're doing things differently than everybody else, you have to maintain the same productivity as everybody else and do extra. So you have to find a way to do this. So chunking your time is going to help you do this. Because in organizations, what often happens is the status quo has such inertia. And why does it have such inertia? People come in, they have great ideas. The new managers come in, new leaders come in, new CEOs come in. Very, very rarely do things change. Unless the person ahead of them was fired, then things change. So why is it that through retirements, through promotions, very rarely do we see change? And I think part of the answer is psychological. And the part of the answer, we can go to loss aversion. So if you come into an organization and you start doing things differently and it works out, and let's say the gain is 100%, well, you're going to personally capture maybe 2 or 3% of that. You're going to get a little bit of upside, but not much. But if you come in and you start changing things and doing things differently, and things don't work out, you're going to get fired, you're going to get canned, you're going to have the whole failure. So on one hand, you have this asymmetric, right? You're going to get completely canned, or you're going to get a little bit of value. Why would I try to do anything else? When you think about it, professors are kind of in the same boat, right? They teach, they're in a service industry. Students have demands. So what do professors do? I mean, they carve out office hours. They say, if you want help and support, come see me these days at these times. I got an open door, line up and take a number. Outside of those days and those hours, you know, it's basically leave me alone. And when you can't see the forest, you think you've done, this is another problem here, right? So when you can't see the forest, you think you've done something when you pass it from your inbox to somebody else's. This is how organizations die. The extent to which someone can constantly pass around an email and say, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Well, they do a half-assed job of putting something together and massaging the thoughts of others says a lot about the culture of the company. That's shallow work. One of the biggest problems in business is getting people to focus on the big problems, getting people to think like an owner. An owner sees the forest and the trees, but he doesn't get too caught up in any particular tree, because an owner realizes that passing emails around is not helping get anywhere. It's running on a treadmill. An owner understands that people should be proactively solving problems, and the best way to get them to do that is to give them a safe environment and hold them accountable. And for that, they need time to do the work, real time. I had a question on work and friendship balance. I'm not really the person to ask here because I've got a very controversial take on this and a lot of freedom that most people don't have. However, I'll tell you what works for me and what I've seen work for other people. So, and what I've seen not work, more importantly. So a lot of people don't want to work with friends. I'm the opposite. I love working with friends. I wouldn't structure my life any other way. I always want to work with friends. So for me, work and life blend. I mean, it's 24/7. Work is life and life is work. And I don't try to balance these things. I'm not seeking to have two separate lives. I'm not seeking to do a little bit of each. I'm seeking to merge them and blend them and do it with people I love. So given I know this about myself, I want to surround myself with friends. I want to work with friends, and I get to work with two of my closest friends every day. So I work with Jeff at Farnham Street. Jeff and I have been best friends and business partners for almost 10 years now, and Jeff is amazing. And it's a pleasure working with him. And, you know, we've had our moments like everybody else, but there's nobody I'd rather be working with than my friends. So I recently started working closely with another one of my best friends, Brent Bashore at Adventures. And Brent's one of the most amazing people I know. And many of you don't know this, but I have a background in investing. So I've been helping him search for companies to buy and help integrate them into Adventures family to make sure that they're working on the toughest problems. In short, I'll be living a lot of the stuff that we talk about on Farnham Street, and that should make the content even better than it already is. The point of this, there's no two people I'd rather be working with. Life is full of ups and downs, successes and failures. I want to surround myself with friends. I want to succeed with friends. I want to celebrate my successes with friends. I want to help my friends succeed. I won't have any regrets this way. Now, I realize that probably doesn't work for you, but I want to give you some perspective on what works for me and why. Here's one thing that doesn't work. I've never seen anyone be two different people. I've never seen anyone who's someone at work, someone at home, someone with friends. I've never seen that work. So what have I seen that does work? Mostly working backwards with relatively clear boundaries. I've seen people set a 9-to-5 schedule and make sure they spend time with friends weekly. This works. The happiest couples I know have weekly dates, come hell or high water. They make a point not to let more than a week go by without a date. The point here is to take time on a regular basis for things that matter. Go for beers with the guys every Thursday. Go out with the girls every Wednesday. Pay for the sitter if you have kids for the sake of your marriage. Go out with your spouse every week. Okay, that addresses all of the questions and topics, broadly speaking, that were sent in. If you have any questions, I'll take some on the chat right now, and if not, we can end the call. Thank you. All right, no questions. Thank you very much for participating. Oh, we got one question here. Any advice for a college student balancing learning and many areas of study? Yeah, connecting ideas. If you're trying to synthesize the world, you really want to start linking the ideas in different subjects. Often the vocabulary becomes the linking aspect. There's things that repeat in different subjects. They're called different things. That's where you want to hone in on, sorry. And you want to focus. I would take professors up on office hours. I would walk in and I would do that. And what I would do with that is I would talk to them. And I would start using words that aren't in the textbook, words from other disciplines, and see how they respond. And I think you'll get a lot of benefit there. All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions. Listen, guys, thank you so much. This has been a blast. The feedback's been amazing. Really happy, really excited we get to do this. We'll do it again soon. Thanks.